Since the beginning of its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, the Russian military has faced severe challenges with its heavy armored vehicles. These issues stem from massive equipment losses, diminishing reserves, and the necessity to adapt battlefield tactics. The widespread destruction of Russian tanks and armored vehicles, combined with the growing effectiveness of Ukraine drone warfare and artillery, has forced Russia to change its approach to combat. Between February 24, 2022 and January 25, 2024, the Russian ground forces likely lost around 2,600 main battle tanks, or MBTs, and 4,900 other armored combat vehicles in Ukraine. The initial months of the invasion saw some of the heaviest losses, as Russian forces attempted large-scale mechanized assaults, often encountering well-prepared Ukrainian defenses equipped with modern Western-supplied anti-tank weapons, such as javelins, NLAWs, and Stugna-P systems. In 2023, the nature of the conflict shifted. Russian forces adopted a more defensive posture, especially following Ukraine's summer counteroffensive. This resulted in a 40% reduction in vehicle losses compared to 2022. However, while defensive operations reduced the number of destroyed armored vehicles, the war of attrition continued to take a toll on Russian reserves. Despite these heavy losses, Russia has maintained a steady supply of new tanks. Reports suggest that Russia is capable of producing at least 100 new tanks per month, allowing it to replenish battlefield losses to a certain extent. However, due to constraints in manufacturing capacity and Western sanctions on high-tech components, many of these tanks are either older Soviet-era models, such as the T-62 and T-72, or modernized versions of outdated designs. The extensive battlefield losses have significantly drained Russia's armored vehicle reserves. Satellite imagery and open-source intelligence indicate that nearly one-third of the armored combat vehicles stored before the invasion are no longer available. One of the most striking examples is the depletion of MTLB, or Multipurpose Transporter Tractor Light Armored Vehicles, which have been widely used as improvised armored personnel carriers due to the shortage of more advanced platforms. Before the invasion, Russia had approximately 2,527 MTLBs in storage. As of early 2024, that number has dwindled to just 922 units, marking a 63% reduction. This depletion has forced Russia to deploy increasingly outdated and improvised vehicles to the front lines. For example, analysts have identified Russian forces using repurposed civilian trucks, outdated BDR-50 armored personnel carriers from the 1950s, and even turretless tank hulls converted into mobile gun platforms. Such adaptations indicate a growing shortage of modern combat vehicles and an increasing reliance on improvised battlefield solutions. The massive loss of equipment has been accompanied by catastrophic human losses. According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, as of February 2, 2025, total Russian personnel losses have reached approximately 841,660 soldiers. The scale of Russian casualties has increased dramatically in 2024. Open-source intelligence reports indicate that in December 2024 alone, Russian forces recorded an all-time monthly high of 48,670 personnel losses. Since June 2024, this number has been steadily increasing, setting new records in October and beyond. These figures reflect the growing intensity of the conflict, particularly as Russian forces have attempted new offensives despite dwindling armored reserves. Without sufficient mechanized support, Russian units have increasingly relied on mass infantry assaults, often suffering devastating losses. Due to the depletion of armored vehicles, Russian forces have been forced to adapt their battlefield tactics. Initially, in 2022, the Russian military relied on large-scale mechanized assaults, attempting to rapidly advance with tank columns and armored convoys. However, these tactics proved disastrous, with entire armored formations ambushed and destroyed in battles, such as the failed advance on Kiev and the defense of Chernihiv and Sumy. By 2023 and 2024, as equipment shortages worsened, Russia shifted toward more infantry-based warfare. Instead of relying on heavily armored breakthroughs, Russian commanders increasingly deployed waves of infantry assaults, particularly in key battle zones such as Avdiivka, Bakhmut, and Kupiansk. This approach mirrors the meat grinder tactics used during World War I, where sheer numbers were prioritized over technological superiority. Russian forces, including mobilized conscripts, convicts from Wagner-style penal battalions, and hastily trained recruits, were often sent in human wave attacks, attempting to overwhelm Ukrainian positions at enormous cost. While this strategy has allowed Russia to exert continuous pressure on Ukrainian defenses, it has resulted in unprecedented casualties and significantly reduced combat effectiveness. One of the most defensive factors in Russia's armored vehicle struggles has been the effective use of Ukrainian drones. Since the early days of the war, Ukraine has expanded its drone capabilities, developing a wide range of surveillance, kamikaze, and loitering munitions. By 2024, drones have become an essential component of Ukrainian battlefield strategy. Ukrainian forces have used FPV drones, Bayraktar TB2 UAVs, and custom-made explosive drones to identify and target Russian armored columns before they reach combat zones, deliver precision strikes against tanks, armored personnel carriers, and self-propelled artillery, disrupt Russian logistics, targeting supply convoys, fuel depots, and command centers. The increasing effectiveness of drone warfare has forced Russian forces to constantly adapt their tactics. Many Russian units have resorted to wielding improvised cope cages onto tanks in an attempt to mitigate drone strikes. However, these modifications have provided limited protection, as Ukrainian drones have repeatedly demonstrated their ability to penetrate or bypass such defenses. In addition, Ukraine has used long-range drone strikes to attack Russian military-industrial sites deep inside Russia, targeting tank factories and supply chains, further complicating Russia's ability to replace battlefield losses. The Russian military's heavy equipment losses, combined with the depletion of reserves, shifting battlefield tactics, and Ukraine's advanced use of drone warfare, have placed Russia in an increasingly difficult position. While Moscow has managed to sustain offensive operations by relying on sheer manpower and industrial production, its ability to maintain a modern, mechanized army is rapidly deteriorating. As the war continues into 2025, the Russian army faces critical challenges in maintaining both its armored vehicle stockpiles and the manpower required to operate them. The increasing reliance on older, less capable vehicles, combined with high personnel casualties, suggests that Russia's long-term military effectiveness is steadily declining. Meanwhile, Ukraine continues to enhance its drone capabilities, improve defensive fortifications, and integrate Western military aid, further shifting the balance of power on the battlefield. In the long run, Russia's ability to sustain prolonged warfare may depend on whether it can adapt to these new realities or whether the ongoing losses will eventually cripple its warfighting capacity. One of the key issues facing Russia's armored forces is the shortage of modern tanks due to industrial limitations and Western sanctions. Before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Russia's military-industrial complex was producing around 200 to 250 tanks per year. However, due to heavy combat losses and the growing demand for replacements, this capacity has proven insufficient. The main battle tank of Russia's army, the T-90, is produced in limited numbers, while newer models like the T-14 Armata have failed to enter mass production. The Armata project, once presented as a revolutionary step in tank warfare, has faced persistent technical problems, delays, and high costs. As a result, the Russian military has been forced to rely on older Soviet-era models, such as T-72B3 and even T-62 tanks, some of which date back to the 1960s. Additionally, Western sanctions have severely impacted Russia's ability to produce advanced weaponry. Many of the components required for modern tanks, such as thermal imaging sights, communication systems, and advanced armor materials, were previously imported from European countries, particularly France and Germany. With access to these components now cut off, Russia has resorted to using lower-quality domestic substitutes, significantly reducing the effectiveness of its newer tanks. Despite attempts to ramp up production by activating old Soviet factories and mobilizing more resources, Russian industry struggles to keep up with battlefield losses. Reports indicate that even refurbished tanks are being sent to the front with downgraded equipment, making them more vulnerable to Ukraine's modern Western-supplied anti-tank systems. The shortage of modern tanks and reliance on outdated models have forced Russian forces to change their battlefield tactics. Instead of traditional armored offensives, they now rely more on infantry assaults and artillery fire to break through Ukrainian defenses. This shift has led to higher Russian infantry casualties, as soldiers are often sent forward with minimal armored support. In addition, Ukraine's use of precision long-range weapons such as HIMARS and Storm Shadow missiles has targeted Russian tank repair facilities and supply depots, further complicating the Kremlin's ability to sustain its armored forces. With fewer modern tanks available and ongoing losses, the effectiveness of Russian armored units continues to decline, forcing them into a defensive posture in many areas of the front. In conclusion, Russia's inability to produce enough modern tanks, coupled with sanctions restricting access to critical components, has significantly weakened its armored forces. This reality forces the Russian military to rely on older, less effective models and adopt tactics that expose its troops to greater risk. The long-term sustainability of Russia's tank operations remains uncertain, as Western military aid to Ukraine continues to evolve with more advanced anti-tank weapons. That's all for today, friends. Subscribe to the channel to not miss new videos. This material was prepared by Hustler. See you soon.